Every single week, I speak to women who are struggling to lose weight, and when I ask them what they've tried, one answer comes up again and again. I'm cutting out the carbs. When I then ask why, I've never actually had someone give me a clear reason other than they saw it online or because the weight dropped off pretty quickly last time. So in this video, I want to give you the actual science as to what is happening so you can make your own decision based on the science and how your body works. I'm also going to give you some very important information as to what cutting carbs does to your hormones and metabolism, especially as you're a woman. And at the end, I'll show you my approach that I use with my female clients to use carbs to lose fat. What you decide is completely up to you, but at least watch this video so you have the information to make an informed decision. Okay, before we go any further, I want to make sure we're on the same page and we're talking about the same thing, because I think this is where most of the confusion starts. I pretty much every single week speak to women who have told me they've cut out carbs yet, but then when I then ask them what they are eating, they name carbohydrates in pretty much every single meal. So I like to think about carbohydrates in a spectrum. At one end, you have the ultra processed, simple sugar carbohydrates, things like donuts, cakes, biscuits, that are usually mixed with a lot of fat, very calorie dense, very easy to overeat. We're not going to be talking about those today. I think we can all agree eating 4 donuts a day probably isn't the best strategy for fat loss or just healthy in any sense, but I will show you how I recommend fitting in those later because cutting them out isn't completely necessary. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the fibrous carbohydrates, so vegetables, things like broccoli, carrots, kale, peppers. And again, hopefully we can all agree no one has ever got fat off eating too many vegetables. And then we have the middle, which is where I think most people are referring to when they're saying they're cutting carbs. Things like your rice, potatoes, pastas, bread, oats. These are the carbs we're going to talk about today. So let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is when you start cutting these out, you will see a massive drop in the scales. You've probably lived this cycle. It's New Year, you got holiday coming up, whatever it's going to be, and you decide to cut out rice, pasta, breads, you start training a lot more, you start eating salads with a lean meat or loads of vegetables every single day. And for the first few days or even the first few weeks, the scale does go down a lot. Every single day. But here is what is actually happening. When you eat carbohydrates, your body stores them in either the liver or in your muscles as glycogen. So let's say this is going to be a gram of carbohydrate. That then gets stored in the muscle. However, for every 1 gram of carbohydrate you have stored in your muscle, it's also going to hold on to 4 grams of water. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when you stop eating carbohydrates, I'm assuming you're still going to be moving, so your body will start using the carbohydrates in your muscles to burn off. Once that has happened, it's also going to release the 4 grams of water. If you pay attention, you'll notice the first few days, you will go to the toilet more. So when the scales say you've lost 5 pounds, that is not coming from fat. That is coming from water. In fact, to lose 5 pounds of fat, you would need to be in a calorie deficit of 17,500 calories, which I very much doubt you're doing. In fact, athletes use this deliberately. Fighters cut carbs on the weigh-in week. Bodybuilders drop carbs the week of the show. In fact, I've actually used this strategy to weigh in for fights and for photo shoots. It works really well for short-term scale manipulation. But I'm assuming you're not a professional athlete looking to drop weight for a specific sporting event. You're looking for more long-term, healthy, sustainable fat loss. But what happens after week 1, week 2? You probably experienced this. Glycogen stores will get depleted and the scales will start to plateau. And then this is usually where the other problems start. You feel that flat, tired, foggy, irritable feeling all the time. And if you've started a new workout program while starting this diet, you're probably now starting to find those workouts 10 times more harder. And then we have the other part that often gets left out. Women are not men. Your body is designed to be more hormonally sensitive and protect energy more than it is mine. When you aggressively cut carbohydrates, your body will see that as a threat. And one of the first things that's going to spike is going to be your cortisol, the main stress hormone. And chronically elevated cortisol makes fat loss way harder, worsens sleep, increases cravings, and keeps your nervous system stuck in that survival mode. Low carbohydrate can also disrupt the hormones involved in thyroid function, such as estrogen, which plays a massive role in regulating your metabolism. This will sharpen your energy, stubborn weight gain, and that feeling you've probably felt where your body is fighting you. Your brain also heavily relies on glucose, and guess what's most responsible for regulating your hormones? So, when women cut out carbs too aggressively, this is often what happens. Seems fine for the first few days, first few weeks, but then your energy tanks, your mood drops, your cycle becomes irregular, PMS gets worse, cravings build. Eventually, you just reach a breaking point, you overeat, you blame yourself and just think, do you know what, weight loss is just impossible. Now, like I said at the start, my goal here is not to tell you what to do, but just give you the information so you can decide for yourself. But if your goal is fat loss that actually lasts past week 3, here's the approach I use for carbs with my clients. First, you need to understand that fat loss comes from a calorie deficit, not eliminating any of the specific macronutrients like carbohydrates. You do not need to be in a carb deficit, you need to be in a calorie deficit. Now, let's go back to that carb spectrum. When you're building a meal, on your plate, have a controlled portion of carbohydrates and measure it out as a fist. With the vegetables on your plate, load them up. The more the merrier. They're going to leave you full, support digestion, and you're not going to overeat on them. Now, when it comes to the sugary foods, the treats, this is where the strategy really matters. No, you don't need to eliminate them, but at the same time, you obviously need to be a bit more intentional. Firstly, look for the low-calorie options. If you go around, you will find the lower-calorie crisps, chocolate, bars out there. Plus, rather than eating them when you fancy, make sure you're planning when you're going to be having them. Now, if you are going to be having something a bit more calorie-dense, shall we say, have it in the evening. So if your cravings trigger after, you've got sleep coming up, you haven't got to go through the rest of your day fighting those cravings. A few other things, keeping breakfast lower in carbs works well for most women, especially if you're working from home and you're going to be sat for long periods during the morning. If you are going to be having a more high carb meal, try and have it in the evening or before a workout. And another tip, if you do eat your food separately on the plate, when you're eating it, start with the protein first, then move on to the vegetables, and then finish with the carbohydrates. This method has been shown to leave you the fullest. I don't do this because I just like to mix everything up on the plate and eat it all in one fork, but this does work for some people. Now, hopefully this gives you enough information to decide on whether cutting carbohydrates is really the answer for you, especially if your goal is more long-term sustainable fat loss. But if you've tried cutting carbohydrates, chances are you've also at some point tried tracking your calories. So if you want my honest opinion on calorie tracking, watch this next video.